Hello again, and welcome to the seventh video in my set of videos showcasing my drawings of locations on the London Monopoly board. And in this seventh video, we're going to look at the green set. Now, like the yellows before them, the greens have both geographic and thematic links. Both Regent Street and Bond Street have junctions with the other property, Oxford Street. Also, all three of them are some of the most exclusive shopping areas in the centre of London. Now in the picture you can see Regent Street. Regent Street is named after the Prince Regent, the man who would become King George IV. Now I've got a soft spot for this particular obese royal reprobate, not least because I took him as a specialist subject on a well-known British quiz show that is connected with the words pass, and I've started so I'll finish. Regent Street was one of the very first planned developments of London to actually be developed. Both Sir Christopher Wren and John Evelyn had drawn up plans for redeveloping the City of London after the Great Fire of 1666, and these would have used brand new street plans. But it took so long for anything practical to start happening about the plans that people had already gone ahead and rebuilt their houses or built new houses on the old street plan. So coming back to Regent Street, this was originally built by the architect John Nash. He was the man who was responsible for rebuilding the Regent's elegant and sedate marine pavilion in Brighton, and he's particularly associated with the architecture of Bath. He became so synonymous with that particular style that cartoonist George Cruikshank famously labelled him as the one what builds the arches in a cartoon from 1829. Now, originally, Nash planned Regent Street as a straight boulevard, but this was impossible because of land ownership issues. Today, Regent Street would be unthinkable without its elegant curve at the Piccadilly Circus end. And it all makes the street one of the most thoroughly recognisable of all London's great thoroughfares. Now, I mentioned about shopping, and Regent Street is certainly not short on famous stores, including Liberty's and Hamley's, noted in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's oldest toy shop. For a long time, it was also the largest toy shop in the world, but it lost that particular record during the 1990s. Regent Street changes name a couple of times as it continues to Oxford Circus, which is at the junction with the next green property, Oxford Street. Now, where Regent Street becomes Portland Place, you'll find the BBC headquarters in Broadcasting House, which is a remarkable Art Deco building. A little further along, where it becomes Langham Place, there's the only one of John Nash's original Regent Street building still standing, which is the wonderfully dotty All Souls Church. Well, let's keep going to Oxford Street. So if you do keep going, you come to Oxford Circus, junction with Oxford Street, which is second amongst the greens. Oxford Street is only one short section of one of the main thoroughfares leading west out of the centre of London. And in fact, just about 4 miles west, it becomes the Uxbridge Road, and that's the main street running through West Ealing and Hanwell, where I grew up. It follows the route of a Roman road, the Via Trinobantia, which led all the way to Hampshire. The Oxford Street section of the road runs from Tottenham Court Road to Marble Arch. Now, Marble Arch was built by John Nash as a ceremonial gateway to Buckingham Palace, but it was moved to its present location to make room for the extension work on the palace in the 1850s. Its current location was once called Tyburn, which is where the gallows held public executions. Oxford Street's reputation as a shopping street largely came about with the 20th century, and if you were to pinpoint one pivotal factor in its development, must have been Harry Gordon Selfridge's decision to open his eponymous department store on Oxford Street in 1908. Amongst the many distinctions the store holds, it was the venue for the first ever public demonstration of a form of television in 1925. Like Regent Street, Oxford Street is also famous for its annual Christmas lights, and every year since 1959 a celebrity of various sorts has ceremoniously turned on the lights. Not the same celebrity every year, obviously. Oxford Street also boasted its own lovable eccentric for many years. From 1968 until his death in 1993, a man called Stanley Green paraded up and down the street with a placard advising people to eat less meat and reduce their libido, which would make them kinder and nicer people. He also produced a pamphlet on the subject, and that sold an estimated 87,000 copies. Now, when I visited Oxford Street, I did actually see Mr. Green once or twice, but I never spoke to him. Later on, I saw him interviewed on a segment for a TV show, and he came across as a very pleasant, if slightly unworldly gentleman. There's precious little else about the Green properties you could possibly describe as unworldly, mind you. So let's go on to Bond Street. Nowadays, Bond Street is divided between New Bond Street, the northern section, and Old Bond Street, the southern section. But it's commonly just called Bond Street. Just visually, you might wonder why Bond Street, relatively narrow and modest in appearance when compared with the elegance of Regent Street and the wide, eternally crowded bombast of Oxford Street, why it's actually the boss location of the Green set. Well, if we boil it down to simple terms, there are a couple of reasons. Firstly, Bond Street got going as an exclusive shopping street far earlier than the other two did. It was built up by Sir Thomas Bond around 1720. History doesn't reveal if he was ever shaken or indeed stirred. Prestigious shops were established on Bond Street during the 18th century. Bond Street has managed to maintain this air of exclusivity. So much so that Carl Fabergé's only establishment outside of Russia came to Bond Street in 1910. It did close 5 years later due to the turmoil in Russia caused by the First World War, but Bond Street is still home to upmarket jewellers like Asprey and Garrard's. It's also the auction capital of London, being home to both Sotheby's and Bonhams. There's a modern sculpture I really like in Bond Street. If you look at it quickly, it looks just like a bench with two old codgers chewing the fat on it. It's called Allies because the two old codgers are actually Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. It was erected in 1995 by the Bond Street Association to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. Well, there we are. That's 7 colour sets down. And there's only 2 properties in the 1 colour set we have left, the purples. So we'll be looking at them in the next video. Hope you can join me then. Bye!